In this lecture segment, we'll look in detail at the JavaScript code for event handling and DOM manipulation. So we're going to look at the tabs v5.js file, as you can see here. And let's just start with line 1 that assigns a value to the window onload property. Now, this property, if assigned, is expected to be a function, and it's our first example of an event handler. When the current page is done loading, the onload property of the window object gets called as an event handler for the load event. Reference the earlier in-lecture question on that event. Event handlers are almost all set up either in this way, assigning event handler functions to designated properties of the object that will have the event, or via another method we'll look at in a bit, an add event listener call. Almost all JavaScript web apps use the onload handler, or some equivalent, as their main setup function, because setting up the app works reliably once the page is loaded. But not before then. A simple JavaScript main program cannot be guaranteed to wait till the page loads, so you need the event handler. Now, on line 2, we use, or have our first use of a document function. Get elements by class name. This gets an array of element objects representing all nodes in the DOM tree that have class tab block. Now, in our example, there'll be just one such element, right? The one at the top of the tab control. But the JS is designed for other possible HTML layouts with multiple tab controls, so we won't assume just one. Getting all the elements that meet certain criteria is a very common task in JavaScript, and the document object provides a number of methods for this purpose. In fact, there's our first in-lecture question. Read the docs and come up with at least 3 other methods of the document object that find elements using various criteria. Coming back from a pause there, other possibilities: get element by ID, get elements by tag name, get elements by name. They're all good examples of this. Web UI libraries like jQuery offer even more powerful element searching facilities, often using a notation that's comparable to the style rule sets to describe the elements desired. Now, line 5, loops through all the tab control elements, configuring each one. In our example, just one. Configuring each set of tabs and pages. Now, lines 8 and 9 start by getting all controls under the root tab control element that have style tab and page. The get elements by class name method of tab control works just like that for document, but it searches only under tab control. Here's question 2. The HTML element objects have almost the same element searching functions as the document object, but not quite. Find at least one document element searching function that's not in the element objects. Coming back from a pause there, get element by ID is unique to the document object. Evidently, there's not enough use for finding a particular element by ID underneath another element for that to be included in the element object. So now that we have all the tabs and pages, lines 11 and 12 make the first tab and first page show as selected. The setAttribute method of element objects allows setting of any HTML attribute of the element in question. You pass it the string name of the attribute and the string value you'd give the attribute if you were writing it directly in HTML. So setAttribute of name value has the same effect as writing name equals value in the HTML. And line 11, for instance, has the effect of putting class equals tab selected tab into the HTML for the first tab. Now, this is a powerful function, and it allows all manner of changes to the DOM tree. Lines 11 and 12 use it to add the selected classes to the first tab and page. Question 3. Check the docs again to answer how do I remove an attribute from an element altogether? Do I use setAttribute name and null, for instance? Coming back from a pause. No, you don't use setAttribute. The docs specifically discourage this. There's a method removeAttribute, which you use instead. Now we'll need to keep track of which tab and page are currently selected, so we can deselect them later when another tab is clicked instead. In lines 13 and 14, do this by adding properties to tab control, decorating it in the JavaScript design parlance. The ability to spontaneously add properties to objects is highly convenient in UI code, where complex connections between objects representing different UI elements are often needed. So now line 16 loops through all the tabs, with line 17 placing in each tab element a property pointing to the page that the tab controls. And then line 18 adds yet another property pointing back to the tab control. Both of these will be used in the event handling. And again, connections between UI elements are important in UI code, and JS properties make establishing such connections very convenient. Here's a question for you. I could have done without the control property of the tab. If I want to find the tab control for a given tab, considering the structure of the HTML that I have above for the tab control, how do I do that? What's another way to find the tab control for a specific tab, given the structure of the HTML and appropriate functions or properties of the tab element? Again, assuming you've gone back and looked up the documentation a little bit, you should find that the parent node property of an element gives the parent, and so we'd want tabs bracket j dot parent node, which would also work. The tab control is the grandparent of the tab element. Remember that there is a row element that sits between them. By the way, don't forget to check both properties and functions when you're looking for a feature in the documentation. If you hunted for a function, getParent, it's not there. And so now, with everything prepared, we finally come to the setup of the event handler for mouse clicks on the tab. Now, line 20 uses the previously mentioned alternative method for setting up an event handler, the addEventListener function. And you call it on the tab in question. Any HTML element that might receive an event may register a function to be called when that event occurs on that element. Line 20 registers an anonymous function to be called on the click event. A mouse click on tabs J will result in a call of the function. Events are identified by name, passed as the first parameter to addEventListener, and there are a lot of possible events, each with its own name. Look up, once again, a list of the event types, and find out what we'd give for the first parameter of addEventListener if we wanted to respond to a double click. Be careful, by the way, how you do this research. You don't want to try reading the W3C reference specification. That's just too dense. Nor are we looking for details on event objects, which we'll discuss in a bit. You want a list of events by their string name. The Mozilla event reference is an example. Then with that bit of a research hint, and pause again, the event name you'd use is DBLClick. Now, as you know from prior JavaScript study, every JS function has a this parameter, even if it's just the global object by default. When the event handler is called, the event handling system passes the element object for the tab that was clicked, tabs J, as this. So the code for the event handler on line 21, for instance, uses this to obtain the control property that we decorated on line 18. And then lines 23 through 24 use the tab control object to get the decorations for selected tab and selected page, and deselect them by changing their styles back to just tab and page. Lines 25 and 26 make the clicked tab and its corresponding page selected. And notice that, of course, the match page decoration from line 14, line 17 is being used here. And then, of course, lines 27 through 28 update the control decorations so that the next tab click will show that we should deselect the tab and the page that we just selected. Okay, so it's time to try it out here. And we'll bring it up in a browser. And, it doesn't work. Now, we did get the first tab and page selected at page load, but there's no response at all to the mouse clicks. It might as well be a static HTML page. This is a real bug from my own development of the example, and it took me through so many interesting debugging tools and trials that it will now be the subject of our next lecture segment, where we'll get this example actually working to arrive at the nice version I showed you at the beginning of the topic.